All right, so let's take a look at mocking services. We did talk a little bit about mocking services last week, which basically entailed the overriding of the access to a remote data source, right? That we overrode the definition of fetch, so that any access, any request that were going to go out to a remote service, instead we intercepted it and we were able to provide some mock data as opposed to actually going out to the service. So basically the concept is that we have a React component, whether it's stateful or stateless or container or whatnot, right? And so what we like to be able to do is remove the dependency of having to go out to the network through AJAX over HTTP, and instead provide a replacement that can take the place of that web service in such a way that now we can test we can do unit tests on our application without having the dependency of having to be in a network, right? So we want to remove that. So if you remember, the implementation of the services that we have currently looks something like this, right? We typically might have a class that perhaps is a singleton, uses a singleton design pattern, and then it has all sorts of functions, declares all sorts of an API that would then go out and through a network access go out to the server and fetch data, right? Either posting, or if you're doing create, or doing a put if you're doing an update, or a get if you're doing all sorts of finder methods, right? So we're very aware of what these APIs look like. So basically, we want to be able to mock this, and we talked about last week on how to do that, right? What we did basically is to override globally the definition of the fetch function, meaning that we're still going to be using the same file, the same service implementation, but we're going to intercept every access, every query to the fetch function, right? And we were able to do that in this particular case using the just.function, and then providing a replacement function that could take the same arguments that the original fetch function did, and then we would feed it and then control what the actual return values were. So let's delve into that just a little bit more. Notice that the original fetch, the original fetch use, right, takes at least two arguments. The first argument is a string that represents the URL where the network is going to be sent to, and then the second argument is an optional argument that is kind of like a configuration object, right, that tells it whether this is a post, a put, a delete, and by default this is a get, right? So all these gets, notice that they don't have a configuration object. That's because it's the default. You don't have to tell it's a get. It's already a get. But if it's anything other than a get, you have to provide additional configuration that tells it whether it's a post, put, or delete. Okay. So those are the two arguments for the fetch, and so we're going to replace the fetch with another function that also takes two arguments, and we know that the order of those arguments are that the first is the URL, and the second one is a configuration object. So the implementation of this replacement function, right, is going to check to see if there's no config. If there's no config, we're going to assume that this is a get, right? And we're gonna behave as if we were getting, right? We're not going to go out to a database or server at all. And then all the else ifs here are to verify, to check to see if the config is a post, a put, or delete. And for every one of these options, we would like to, provide different data, right, mock data based on what the URLs might be. So first we'll look at the config, and then we look at the URL. So within the first config, from within the first if statement, if there is no config, meaning this is a get, we only have two options, right? You are either asking for all the quotes, or you're asking for a specific quote. Those are the only two. Right, find by ID or find all, right? And so we can treat both cases. We can check to see, does the URL contain such a quote, such a URL, or does it contain this, right? So do you want all the quotes, or do you want just one quote? And in each case, right, we would either return one or the other. So for instance, in the one where we know that you're asking for all the quotes, we're going to return to you all the quotes, right? These are the quotes in the mock file. We're going to return that. We know that the actual implementation, we know that it wraps it inside of a promise. We know that the whoever's calling this is going to be using the .then promise API. So we need to fake that. We need to fake all of that, and so we create our own promise. And we know that that this is going to be handled first by the actual implementation of the service, which if you remember has a .then response JSON, right? Which parses the JSON object out of the body, HTTP body. But there is no HTTP body here, right? There is no HTTP, so we have to fake that too, right? That it's going to expect a function called JSON, right? That presumably parses the data from the HTTP body. There is no HTTP body. So we're faking that too, right? The JSON function that they're going to call is just going to return the quotes, the whole quotes here from the mocked set of JSON objects. So the other one, if it's just one, right? It's similar, but it would be quotes sub 0, quotes sub 1, right? The other one is if it's either a post. Now, in this post, right, we would like to be able to make the service believe that it is indeed sending a JSON object through HTTP, but there's no such thing, right? Instead, what we're going to do is that we're going to take in the config. Remember, the config not only does it have the methods, whether it's post, put, delete, it also has a couple of headers, right? And another thing that you send over is the body of the JSON object that you're creating, right? So we in an attribute called body, and there it is. It's in the config. So config.body. Here we parse it. That typically, notice if you remember, when you send it over, typically you stringify it. Right, you say JSON.stringify, right? So it converts the JSON object into a string. Here we're doing the inverse. Right? We are converting it back to a JSON, right? But because what we're going to do is that we're going to take that quote. We're actually going to push it into the array we just loaded from memory from the mock, right? Into the array that we just loaded from the file. We're going to push it in there. We're going to actually push it into the array we loaded, so the quote is actually going to be in this array. And then we're going to send it back. We're going to send back all the quotes. Now all these quotes contains this brand new quote we just push into the array. So when it renders, when the JSON renders, right, after having created a new quote, now instead of having just 2, it should render now 3 quotes, right? It should now render 3 quotes. So we're basically replacing the server. We are replacing the HTTP request. We are basically reconstructing what the logic should be if indeed you would have gotten to the server. Yes? And we are removing all that dependency so that we can test the actual component. Make sense? Right?